Monday. Wheelhouse, you're listening to ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. It is Monday, February 27th, 2023, as we get things rolling here at the start of another Wheelhouse radio program. Jake Asman, Cody Stoots, BK Brad Kellner, producer Andrew Carlson with you until 7 o'clock. A lot to talk about today, mixing some baseball as Astros spring training continues. Forrest Whitley pitched today. Yes, that actually happened, so we'll get into that and much more. But guys, we start with a tweet sent at 5 a.m. our time from ESPN's Adam Schefter. He tweeted the following: sources, the Bears already have been approached by multiple teams about trading the draft's number 1 overall pick, and Chicago is said to be, quote, leaning towards moving the pick. So the number 1 pick now looks like it's for sale. This tweet gets sent out this morning. Combine gets underway today, and off we go with the big bombshell from Adam Schefter this morning.
Schefter went on a ESPN.com post about basically what he reported in his tweet to say that 8 to 12 teams could be looking to make a switch at quarterback and might be interested in something close to the top pick when they're thinking about going in the direction of a rookie quarterback. Also mentioned the teams that strike out on veterans like Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, Aaron Rodgers would then be looking for the opportunity to trade up to select a quarterback as well. And, of course, the Bears are in a fantastic position to listen to any and every single offer that comes their way. I do have a weird feeling about this, though, because this has been, I don't want to say common knowledge, but this has been expected, and we've heard that they've already gotten offers in the recent weeks. I wonder if those initial offers, the Bears were like, come on, everybody can do better than this. Let's hit Schefty up. Let's let him know. Hey, tell everybody this thing's for sale. Start getting their offers in. Tell the Panthers. Tell the Raiders. Tell the Texans. Make sure Jim Irsay knows when you're hanging out with him in Indianapolis this week at the Combine, it's for sale. I wonder if maybe those initial little conversations weren't to the Bears' liking, and they're like, hey, let's speed this thing up here a little bit. Let's get this thing going, because I would think the Bears, with the most money we've seen in a few years in free agency, I would think the Bears need a pretty good idea exactly what they're doing in the draft to figure out exactly how they're going to spend some of that money, because they got to spend close to $100 million in free agency.
That'd be smart if they were sending that smoke screen out there, because they need to drive up the demand as much as they possibly can, and getting as many teams involved as they possibly can is going to do just that. So it makes sense for the Bears to let the world know that, hey, this pick is for sale. Come call us. And Shefty's right. There are a number of teams out there that need to upgrade at quarterback. And a lot of teams these days are doing it through the draft. You're seeing more and more teams have success with young quarterbacks that they get at the top of the draft every single year. That's what teams are looking to do. Look at Cincinnati and the quick leap they made with Joe Burrow. Look at Jacksonville and the quick leap they made with Trevor Lawrence. This is happening now. This has happened over the history of the NFL, but of course we've seen it happen a couple of times in pretty dramatic fashion over these past couple of years. There are a lot of teams that need a quarterback out there, so the Bears absolutely should be trying to get as many teams involved as they can, because ultimately that's going to land them the biggest return that they could get.
I think part of the reason why, if you're the Bears, you want this out there, is because it's the Combine. You got to look at these quarterbacks, and you hope a team falls in love and is more willing to maybe be more aggressive now than they had been before the Combine. Say whatever you want about the Combine, and we could say it doesn't mean a lot. Some scouts and executives will tell you it means something, doesn't mean everything. Some will tell you it means nothing at all. But it means something, I believe. Otherwise, why would they have it in the first place? Especially the interview process where you get a chance to talk to these prospects, and maybe you fall in love with one of them after the interview. So that's why you want it out there if you're the Chicago Bears. Hey, we're for sale. It's going to take a lot. We want that known, but look at the opportunity you have in front of you for this number 1 pick.
Oh, Tennessee, you didn't know if you really wanted to meet with any of these quarterbacks? Well, you could trade up all the way from 11 to number 1. You better meet with some of them. You could trade from 11 to, 2 if we get the number 2 pick. You better meet with some of those quarterbacks. I mean, heck, Chicago, they own the draft right now. Like, they set the tone for how everything's going to operate. And this could take as long or as little as they want to. They could make a deal in Indianapolis this week if they wanted to. I wouldn't advise that. I feel like the price only goes up for the next few weeks. I do think there is a point where it would sort of turn, and maybe you'd have teams fall off. You'd have teams make other plans at quarterback. But Chicago's got to hit that. Like we talked about it with Nick Caserio trading Deshaun Watson. You got to hit that section of the calendar where you're maximizing your return unless somebody shows up with just a king's ransom right off the bat, and then you make that deal happen.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. Report that to Schefter that there's a king's ransom deal out there and see if somebody's going to beat that. Right?
Somebody comes in with a 2 kings ransom?
Come on now.
I need the Kachunga offer.
There you go. Maybe 2 Kachunga offers is what the Bears could get this year. I mean, deadlines make deals, so I don't expect anything to get done anytime soon. I think we're going to wait until the week of the NFL draft. Hell, maybe the day of the NFL draft before we get an actual announcement for a trade. That feels like what the Bears should do here because someone's going to panic. Somebody's going to get nervous that their guy isn't going to be available where they are currently slotted a pick, and they're going to trade up. They're going to hear rumors about, oh, this team is interested in that guy, and that team's interested in this guy. And then they're going to be like, well, if that's true, then we can't get this guy. So we've got to do whatever we possibly can to make sure that we can draft the player that we're looking for. Deadlines make deals. So, yeah, smart to put this out there right now. Jake, I like your theory, too, with the Combine being here, right? Because you know there are going to be people falling in love with these QBs during the Underwear Olympics. And you're going to see all of these tweets about all of these highlights from these guys at the Combine. And 3 of the 4 quarterbacks are going to be throwing this weekend. So that's going to generate some buzz and publicity for these guys as well. It's smart to send this out right now, but if the Bears are smart, and they're usually not, that's why they suck, and they always will. But if they're smart, they're going to wait for a long time, very close to the draft before pulling the trigger on a trade.
This was NFL Network draft analyst Daniel Jeremiah. He was on a conference call before the Combine got underway, and this was Jeremiah on what exactly the Bears will be looking for in a trade back from the number 1 spot.
Usually when you look at the trade chart, it's about 120%, give or take, in terms of the trade chart value. You have to pay a premium if you're going to come up for a quarterback, which is, great news there for the Bears. So when you look at some of those previous trades, here would be the 3 trades. If we're going to look at those teams as 2 the Texans, 4 the Colts, and 9 the Panthers, here would be how that would shake out on the trade chart. So if you're just going to go back to pick number 2, you're going to get the 2nd pick, the 33rd pick in next year's 2. That would be the trade you'd have there with the Texans. If you go to 4, you'd have to give up a 4th-round pick in 2024, as well as the number 1 overall pick. You would get number 4 overall, number 35 overall, and a 1st-round pick in 24 and a 2nd-round pick in 24. And then if you want to go all the way to 9, you're going to get the 9th pick, you're going to get the number 39 pick, and you're going to get a 1st round in 24, and you're going to get a 1st round in 25.
Woo. Big offers.
Woo. Carolina's a real wild card in this. He mentioned 9. That's where the Panthers currently sit. I have a really hard time imagining that Frank Reich signed right back up for a job and for an opportunity that doesn't involve him getting either an established quarterback or getting one of these rookies at that spot. Now, obviously, they're not in total control of the situation in Carolina, but I have a real hard time thinking Frank Reich's like, yeah, sure, the reason I got fired is because nobody ever settled on a QB and we tried to make it work with duct tape and Carson Wentz for a couple of years. I'll do that again in Carolina.
Carson Wentz just got released. You think he and Reich could work together?
I don't think Frank wants to go down that road again.
What do you mean again?
Again.
They've never worked together before. Yeah, the Panthers are a wild card. The Raiders are too. And no one's talking about the Falcons at 8, right? I mean, Raiders are at 7. Falcons are at 8. Panthers are at 9. There's no terrible, childish joke to be made there. But, all 3 of those teams seemingly make a lot of sense. And what I'm supposed to believe, the Falcons are set on Desmond Ridder because they took him in the 3rd round last year. Their quarterback situation is terrible too. So all 3 of those teams seemingly make a lot of sense. They're all looking to make a splash move. They all have offensive-minded coaches. Keep that in mind. Maybe the desperation level is starting to rise in Atlanta a little bit because this will be year 3 for Arthur Smith there. Maybe he's trying to get a quarterback who can actually settle things down for him. So all 3 of those teams make a ton of sense to move up. And obviously Indianapolis at 4 is the team everyone's talking about the most. But, man, you've got 5 teams in the top 10 if you include the Texans that need a quarterback and realistically should be on the phone with Chicago seeing what it would take to move up to number 1 to make sure that they can get their guy. That's why it makes a ton of sense for the Bears to be trading that pick.
As we sit and talk today, does it feel like all trade-ups lead to Bryce? Is every trade-up scenario a Bryce Young draft pick? Or does it feel like there's a lot more variables, or a bunch more variables to which team it is? Maybe for instance, this team likes this QB a little bit more. This team would like this QB a little bit more. Like, I don't know, is Frank Reich signing up for Bryce Young? I mean, I don't know. He may prefer Levis or Stroud. Same with the Colts. The history of Chris Ballard does not tell you that it's Bryce Young, but does it feel like most trade-ups feel like a Bryce Young scenario?
He feels like the consensus top guy, but that's where this thing starts to change this week. When these guys start throwing and start meeting with teams and the actual coaches start evaluating the prospects. Then the perception of these QBs, it always changes. Every year. Like, I can remember the Baker Mayfield year. No one had Baker Mayfield, a first-round pick at this time during the draft process that year, and he ended up being the first player taken that year. So things change, man. So it feels like Bryce is the top guy, but, man, these things change so quickly.
Yeah, well said. Combine this week. You've got pro days over the next couple of months. Like, right now, I think 90% of the teams that would be trading up to number one would be trading up to get Bryce Young, but that's right now. I mean, Bryce Young could weigh in at 195 pounds this week. That would scare some people. You could have a bad pro day. That would scare some people. Meanwhile, the other three guys could have incredible combines and incredible pro days, and that could elevate them in the eyes of some other teams. So, look, I don't think it's 100% right now. Every team has Bryce Young as their number one guy. I think the majority of teams do. But like Jake said, I mean, we're 2 months away. I think 2 months on the dot from the first round of the NFL draft. A lot can change. Hell, not a quarterback, but last year, Trevon Walker. I mean, at this point, that guy was like plus 30,000 to be the number one pick in the draft. And then, of course, on draft night, who goes number one? Trevon Walker. So it happens. Different positions, different years, different teams. There's plenty of time for this thing to shake out. So we've got a long, long way to go before these teams have made up their mind.
That's why I do put, maybe just for recent years, but certainly last year, feels like Daniel Jeremiah and Lance Erline were two of the guys that were way early on everybody on Trevon Walker. Ultimately, he goes number one. So Jeremiah feels like he's as plugged in as he's ever been in the position that he's in as NFL's network's lead draft analyst. So when he's telling you, hey, this might be the trade, that might be the trade, I'm like, okay, well, I feel like he's not just making that up.
What does he know? In his mock draft, he didn't project any trades. So maybe he's saying the Bears are going to stick and pick.
Still a possibility, an unlikely one.
God.
As probably as least likely as it's ever been, but still a possibility that the Bears are sticking and picking.
And really, the betting odds have reflected this the whole time. Like Schefter's saying it's notable because it's Adam Schefter. He's got 10 million followers, but it's been out there for a while that Bryce Young was still the odds-on favorite to go 1-1 in the draft, and that's because most people figured Chicago was, in fact, going to trade out. 713-780, ESPN's the number. More on what Daniel Jeremiah said during this media conference call. He was asked specifically, Young versus Stroud for the Texans. We'll get into that and more on the combine as well. Keep it right here. It's the Wheelhouse on a Monday on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. 713-780, ESPN's the number. Your call's coming up. I want to hear more from Daniel Jeremiah. We mentioned it. The NFL Network lead draft analyst held a conference call with the assembled media on Friday ahead of the NFL Combine, which starts today. And this was Jeremiah talking about Young versus Stroud for the Houston Texans.
I have Bryce Young. I like Bryce Young better on the tape, but I think CJ Stroud's a really good player. And if you're not comfortable with that price to go up, to get to that number one pick, staying where they are and getting CJ Stroud, I'd feel just fine about that. I think he's just a pure thrower. The big question with him, it's been talked about, was, okay, not a lot of off schedule, not a lot of playmaking, but then all of a sudden you see the semifinal game and you're like, dude, where's this been? He showed you he has that ability. And the old scouting adage is, if you can do it once, you can do it. So he does have that ability. Now, I think Bryce, he's a little bit more of a playmaker to me consistently when you watch him. I just love his instincts and feel. His ability to maneuver within the pocket, I think, is better. So I think Bryce Young is a better player, but I would not be totally bummed if you sat there at 2 and ended up with CJ Stroud.
Okay. So I hear that, Cody, and I'm good with sticking and picking at 2. And this has been a very controversial topic on the radio station. John Granado does not want the number 2 quarterback on the morning show. I was listening to him today with Lance. Jeremy Branham's thoughts on these quarterbacks. We've talked about that on our show. Cody, you're big on get Bryce Young, even if it means trade up. So we are all over the place as a radio station on this very topic.
What Jeremiah said there about Stroud and what some coaches are going to think and what some coaches are going to hope is, if you did it once, we can make sure you do it more times. I don't want to overrate the Georgia game for CJ Stroud's evaluation. Like, I don't want to put too much stock in it. But I also can't ignore it, especially when the off schedule, the playmaking, I was reading a scouting profile of him this morning. There are guys that are concerned about his ability to move, set, and throw, and then the throw on the run. And they're like, hey, yeah, he showed it in the Georgia game, but where has it been? Like, is this something that just for one day the guy was out of his mind and he did it? Or is this something that you can consistently get into his game? Look, there's going to be QB coaches and offensive coordinators and assistant quarterbacks coaches and offensive assistants and all that kind of stuff telling the head coach, telling the general manager, telling ownership, we can do this with this guy or we can't do this with this guy. I do wonder how many people look at CJ Stroud's game and say he displayed a lot of really good stuff, and then that last piece that he was missing, he showed it in Georgia, and we know he can do it, so we're going to try to get him to do it all the time.
I think there will be teams who, I don't want to say fall into that trap, but teams that put a lot of stock into that Georgia game, and it's hard not to. I mean, he was magnificent against the best defense in college football this season, a defense that featured a lot of guys who are going to be playing on Sundays. I mean, he did everything for Ohio State to win that football game, and like DJ said in that cut we just played, like every question you had about CJ Stroud, he kind of answered in that one game. So there are going to be teams who are like, oh, man, if he could do that against that defense, then we believe we can find a way to make that a more consistent aspect to CJ Stroud's game. And look, not only did he play that well against that team, he did it in the playoffs. That was the biggest game of his career, and he delivered. So under pressure, when it mattered most, he delivered. That final drive of the game after Georgia took the lead, he got his team into field goal range. Idiot kicker, who's not a real person because he's a kicker, shanked the game-winning field goal.
Damn.
That would have won the game for Ohio State. That wasn't C.J. Stroud's fault. And come on, we saw what TCU looked like in the final. Ohio State wins that game. C.J. Stroud's having a field day against TCU, and the Buckeyes are national champs. So he was amazing in that game. And, yeah, there are going to be teams, plural, who are like, all right, I've seen enough. All the other stuff was great, but now I know he can do that. That's enough to put him on that playing field with Bryce Young.
If idiot kicker hits the hit, is C.J. Stroud QB1?
There's a chance. There's definitely a chance. Look, if he goes out there against TCU, who's obviously worse than Georgia, I think we all found that out, and he goes out and delivers, then, yeah, I think there's a very good shot. It's at least a closer conversation that he's the dude because he'd have that national championship. Bryce Young didn't have that. And obviously on the biggest stage in the biggest games, he would have delivered in that moment.
Because we know one game can adjust things. We famously talked about Todd McShay's big board where a bowl game for Bryce Young moved him ahead of his teammate Will Anderson for the top spot on Todd McShay's draft board and his top 50 prospects. So it stands to reason that the Georgia game plus a whole nother game for C.J. Stroud could have moved him ahead of Bryce Young in some people's eyes. So that kicker, he owes C.J. Stroud a few bucks.
Maybe. Yeah, not for me. Like, if you're asking me particularly, I'd still have Bryce Young number one, even if Stroud won that game and looked awesome against TCU. But for some people out there, you laid it out perfectly. Bowl games, and look, recency bias is a thing too. And it'd be one thing if that was a game C.J. Stroud played in his second to last year of college. But the fact that that was his last game of his college career, I think impacts some decisions as well.
Stroud, if you look at his body type, height, weight, he's more of your prototypical QB than Young. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if teams simply just have a rule, hey, as much as we love Bryce Young, we can't take a 5'10" and a half, according to Todd McShay, quarterback who weighs 180 pounds. You know, I heard Jeremy Branham talking about Bryce Young's weight, how part of the reason maybe Young's not throwing at the combines because he's just adding weight to say that he weighs this and then he's going to lose the weight by the time he gets to his pro day and throws. There could be something to that. Like the weight stuff with Young, it's not even just the size, it's the weight on top of that. It's a real thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's several teams that have Stroud as the number one QB. I think this time of year is so tricky to figure out what's real and what's not.
Yeah, Levis too. And Levis is the more prototypical size than Bryce Young is, without question. He's built like a linebacker. He's got that Josh Allen look. Everyone's looking for the next Josh Allen, and they're overlooking other things because Josh Allen has been able to do what he's done in the NFL. So, yeah, there are teams we know that value traits more than actual ability. At least it feels that way. So there's got to be a couple of teams right now who already have Stroud ahead of Young, and that could change at the Combine and over the next couple of months leading up to the draft.
Let's go to the phones. Let's see what you're thinking. 713-780. ESPN's the number. Rolando in Mo City. Rolando, you're first up today. You're on the Wheelhouse.
What's going on, guys? So, I do agree. I don't know if y'all were talking about this, but the earlier programs, they were saying if they were asking if Bryce Young goes number one, should the Texans trade back or go with the best player available? And I think they should. I want them to go trade back. But I have a question for y'all. If they do trade back, who is the best team that needs a quarterback that can give the Texans the best option, the best chance to have 2 top 10 picks next year? Thank you. Have a great day.
Orlando, thanks for the call. Well, first off, I don't think the Texans are going to trade out of 2.
Yeah,
if they were to trade out of 2, I mean, you're going to help Tennessee get their franchise quarterback coming up from 11, maybe Carolina 9-2. If they love one of these guys, if we're, I guess, assuming Indy's going from 4-1 in this Rolando scenario there.
I mean, I suppose if you wanted to have a conversation with Seattle, but that doesn't get you in the top 10 next year. The pick that Seattle has at 5 is not their pick. That's the Rams pick. Seattle's pick's in the
Broncos
20s.
pick.
Or the Broncos pick, excuse me. The Broncos pick. Seattle's own pick's in the 20s. So it's not like they're going to just fall off the map and be in the top 10. Rolando put a very strict set of restrictions on that trade back. You got to trade back and that future first that you get, which we're not sure would necessarily be there in a trade back from 2. That future first that you get's got to be in the top 10 next year. That's a hard projection to make.
Atlanta.
Okay. All right.
I'll make it for you, Orlando.
Okay.
I will say this. I don't understand the logic of trading down to a team that wants a quarterback.
No.
Because then, like, if you're trading down, I assume you would still want a quarterback, but you want to pick up extra picks. Like, we trade from 2 to whatever, but we could still get a quarterback that we really like and then pick up a couple of extra picks in the process. But if you're trading to a team that's going to get a quarterback, then there's one fewer quarterback for you to take when it is your turn to go on the clock. So I just don't understand doing that. Makes no sense to me is letting more teams take a quarterback that you could want instead of you just taking that guy.
Jake in Midtown, next up on the Wheelhouse. Jake, tremendous name. You're on the show. What's going on?
Hey guys, what's up? So I've been doing a little bit of research on Anthony Richardson, and I was comparing him to all the other quarterbacks. And I've always been a big Bryce Young guy, just tremendous talent. But that Anthony Richardson guy from Florida is like Lamar Jackson on steroids. He's taller than him, he weighs more than him, and he can run that entire field against that whole defense. So I think that if Bryce Young gets taken at 1, which I saw the Bears are probably going to trade that pick today, or I heard about that today. And, I mean, it's got to be Richardson at 2, I think. Stroud is just, I think that's, with the questions with his mobility, I don't know if I'd be willing to take that risk. And I understand Richardson's going to have to sit for a year, but I don't know if that would be the case in Houston, because we could get like a Case Keenum or someone down there and help develop him. So I'll hang up and listen. Thanks for my call.
Jake, appreciate the call. Look, I've said it's got to be QB at 2. And I like Anthony Richardson more than I like Will Levis, but I'm happy to have somebody else take the Anthony Richardson risk and succeed. It's not a risk or a road I believe the Texans should consider going down. There's too much, yes, the potential that it turns out and he's a one-of-one unicorn type guy at quarterback, that's the best case scenario. That's also the least likely scenario when you think about Anthony Richardson. Like, yes, the best case scenario for Anthony Richardson is also the least likely scenario. And it's the least likely payoff to any of the quarterback selections. Like, he could become one of the most unique quarterbacks in football. That is possible. And his ceiling is higher than those other 3 quarterbacks that are considered to be in the top 4. But it's also the least likely thing to occur. And that's not where the Texans are as an organization. And that's just not what they have right now as far as an opportunity to take.
Real quick, 10 seconds on Anthony Richardson. I keep hearing he's like Cam Newton. He's like Justin Fields. I think that's honestly offensive to those guys. Those guys had way better collegiate careers than Anthony Richardson did at Florida. I mean, Cam Newton was one of the best players in the history of college football. Justin Fields was dynamic. One of his last games, he threw 6 touchdowns against Clemson in the playoff game. Like, I don't know, man. When we use those comps on Richardson, it's like based on just maybe playing style, but who had the better college career? It's not even close when you compare those guys.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, hit the like button down below, and of course, subscribe to my channel. And if you're a Houston sports fan, listen to ESPN Houston 97.5 FM or 92.5 FM weekdays from 3 to 7 every afternoon.